For the first time in history, humanity has evolved to a point where social transition is now possible. Ever since human society has been created, it has been impossible for people to transition from one social class to the other within their lifetime. For example, if you were a farmer in 1500s Europe, there was no way you would possibly become a lord. And if you were a lord in 1500s Europe, there was no way you would possibly become a farmer. The legacy and family infrastructure was built over decades, if not centuries, if not millennia before them. So the burden of building one legacy was divided equally upon many generations, except for now. Effective last century, humanity has reached a point where that whole pressure, which was combined into thousands of people, was gathered into our 5'10" self. And when we look at ourselves in the mirror, we no longer view ourselves as individuals, but rather as the collective representation of all what our ancestors have made, all accumulated into a single body. And this sort of pressure has never been explored in human history. It has never been felt because a person has always thought that it was up to their grandfathers and their grandfathers and their grandfathers to make that decision. And this is particularly true post the World War II era, when globalization came into act. And we saw for the first time millions upon millions of people escaping generations of poverty that existed. And this was particularly true in the global South. So someone who had been growing up through 14 ancestries of poverty for the first time was able to escape it. And after the internet era, we saw that accelerate into unprecedented movements. What this made was an inverse reaction. What was once a global golden opportunity turned into an even heavier burden for many of today's youth. As today's youth emerge into this world, they realize that they are either first or second or maybe third generations of someone who escaped that wealth. But that someone who escaped the family wealth did not have an institutional backing, say like the lords in Europe had, of wealth and connections and institutional legacies. He just built it on his own. And now he had a daughter or a son, and that person has an interesting responsibility. This responsibility is not only to achieve, but rather it is to create something which was unimaginable. And that is a reality that very few people speak about, but very many people feel. When we look at today's average person, the average father or mother has escaped poverty or created some sort of institutional family for their family name for their child. However, this child needs to not only meet up to that expectation, but to exceed it by a far average. And that average is the delta, which we call pressure. And with this pressure, these youth are expected to use the same resources any other person has in today's world, but to achieve far more than what anyone else has been able to achieve. So imagine this. You go to a 1500s farmer in Europe, in the UK, or Ireland, and you say, we expect you to become one of the top 100 people in your community. To him, that's unimaginable. Yet to the average person in today's community, that's the expectation. The expectation is to become a billionaire, a multi-millionaire, which in historical sense is completely unpredictable. On another side, there is good news to this, because for the first time ever, it indeed became possible to achieve the unachievable, to achieve the unimaginable. Over history, there was no way anyone could dream of living in the world we are today, particularly after the technology era and the digitalization and democratization of access to resources. We all have the same resources the richest person on earth has. This is like going back to the Arabian Peninsula 800 years ago, and everyone has 10,000 horses. So we are in a unique position to create something the world has never thought of. So the purpose behind today's talk is to be brief and to invite you to fulfill that potential and fulfill the responsibility to achieve. Thank you.